Welcome to Voices of Esalen. I'm Sam Stern. Today's episode features an interview conducted by Jasmine Horan with her father, Richard Horan. Richard Horan first arrived at Esalen in the mid-1960s, traveling from Los Angeles to Big Sur at the height of a cultural renaissance. He was an early member of the Esalen massage crew and played a pivotal role in founding the Esalen Garden, a space that continues to nourish the land and community today. Horan was also deeply involved in the psychedelic inquiry of the time. Over the years, his connections to Esalen deepened. With Gabrielle Roth, he had a son, Jonathan Horan. Later, he married Peggy Horan, and together they raised two daughters, Lucia and Jasmine. Additionally, Horan's purpose as an artist was revealed to him during his time at Esalen when he founded the Art Barn as a collective with other artists. Horan remains legendary in Big Sur for his mastery of jade carving. His work includes rings, earrings, pendants, belt buckles, and sculptures, many of which are inspired by ancient esoteric symbols and indigenous traditions. As a multimedia artist, he has worked in depth with clay, redwood, and jade, making musical instruments, art objects, and jewelry. Today, we'll hear from Richard as he reflects on his journey, his artistic process, his connection to Esalen, and the life he's built in harmony with the wild nature of Big Sur.
At first it was just a regular little homespun garden with some tomatoes and some beans and some carrots and lettuce and squash. It was like 10 by 10. In the very beginning nobody was interested in it. It was just an empty field. But then everybody saw me doing it. I said, if you gave me a tool to do this with, I could have a giant garden here. In those days, I was really into being a yogi and eating clean foods and stuff, and so it fit right into my lifestyle.
Do you recall what year that was?
67, 68.
What were the first steps to starting it?
I was hungry. I came from a family of organic gardeners. My whole family was like into farming and stuff, and so it was totally natural for me. I didn't have any money, and so I couldn't go to town. So I had to grow a whole bunch of stuff. But the thing about it is that I wasn't really prepared to do this whole thing. Suddenly they said, okay, we're going to back you up on this, and they gave us a bunch of work scholars, I guess you call them, people who just wanted to help out and make the garden. And then we, in a few years, it just turned into this Garden of Eden. It's just a really wonderful place to have a garden. Not hot like inland. It's a cool place. This place has possibilities, and it really does. It's a gold mine of agricultural opportunities. It used to be a farm before, long before, in the Depression. See, in the Depression, there was any little place where people could farm, they did, because you couldn't go to town once a year or twice a year. So they would get seeds, and they grew their food and hunted their deer. And
who was inhabiting the property at that time?
There was this Slate's Hot Springs, and they were famous for chicken dinners on Friday night, and everybody would go down to the baths. It was really famous for years. I remember Gopher used to have the old sign that said it was Slate's Hot Springs, and that's how they operated. The lodge used to be the place where people ate. When I first came in there, I used to have waitresses that would brought your meals. It wasn't like buffet like it is now. At that time in the lodge, they had like gourmet restaurant food, which was like, it didn't fare well with me. And I tended to stay home and eat brown rice and vegetables. The biodynamic method was established by Rudolf Steiner, who was a great orchestra conductor. But he was also a super organic gardener. You got to build your soils. That's what it was all about. And that's what I preached. And then they went on with that, and they made a lot of nice compost heaps. If you have a rototiller, you got to maintain the rotokiller, and you have to pay for it, and you have to go pay the fix. The thing about it is this way of the biodynamic way of gardening, you don't have to do any of that.
So you didn't use any kind of machinery?
No, I got rid of the rototiller, and I started to, about the same time I started reading about this English garden fork way of gardening, where instead of running the rototiller, all you do is you go down the rows with a fork, and you just break the soil. It was ideal. It's like a paradise for a gardener. When I got there, my first job was as a dishwasher. And the dishwasher, I got the job because the guy before me had these ashtrays, big glass ashtrays, would break on the corners, and he slashed his hand on washing one of them. And so he couldn't work, and so they gave me the job. In those days, I didn't even have a septic. The water ran out underneath the dishwasher onto the ground. That's how primitive it was. They fixed that after a while. I moved over to the barn, and then they took over the garden. Because they had by that time they had a whole crew of people.
And they wanted to feed the whole of Esalen, not just your little food crop.
Oh yeah, I understood that.
Yeah.
I just was happy that I got it started. I was really into making pottery and jewelry. I wasn't really into the full-scale farming.
So you were studying what kind of yoga? Who did you study with?
Hatha yoga. Joel Kramer was my teacher. He lived there in a bus by the big eucalyptus tree in the garden. I was a vegetarian, but I got really sick and I got sick, and I kept getting sicker and sicker. And I went to the doctor, and he said, "What are you doing that's different in your life?" And I said, "I don't know, I've been a yogi now, and I'm only being a vegetarian." He says, "Stop that right now and go back and eat food that your grandma made and your mom made. Go back, because what you're doing now is wasting you away." And so I said, okay, and sure enough, I went home and got a hamburger. I was a refugee from Los Angeles. I got back out of the army, and I got a job as a clerk in the thrifty drugstore. And I had to drive 35 miles to get there and back. I had an old pickup truck with side gates, and I put a big piece of plastic over the top, and me and my dog jumped in the truck and took off for Big Sur.
When you arrived at Esalen, in particular, can you describe like the climate there? Was there lots of music? Was there lots of parties? Was there lots of kids?
Oh yeah, it was just,
what was it like?
Everybody, it was a colorful time when people were really being flamboyant. And you could walk around Esalen, there might be 2 or 3 different music venues going on. People playing flutes and playing the drum. It was a really wonderful time. I always remember Alan Watts. He was a real orator, and he would have dinner in the lodge, and then everybody would get together, and he would get a big candelabra with candles, and he would lead this whole procession down to the baths. Yeah, that was really fun. He wrote a great book called The Joyous Cosmology. He was one of the gurus.
Who else was an influence to you as a teacher? Did you meet Joseph Campbell, Abraham Maslow?
Yeah, I met him on a funny basis. I used to drive him to town and back. So I got to chit-chat with him and stuff.
Fritz Perls?
Oh, I know him really well. We used to play chess on rainy nights at Esalen, when you couldn't go down the road because it was all screwed up, and so lots of people would hunker over until the rain stopped.
What about Dick Price? Did you work with him to establish the farming garden?
No, Dick Price didn't have anything to do with it.
And did he give it the
he might
green light?
have, out of my spectrum, said something about it. It was a good idea. But I don't know that. No, Dick Price was a visionary, and he was on his own trip. It didn't have anything to do with me. Except that the one thing that was interesting is that we both loved the backcountry. And so every once in a while I would meet him out in the far backwoods. And he'd be trucking along same trails that I did. So we both had a great love for the wilderness.
Mm-hmm. You had all your gear with you, and he had just his running shorts, right?
That was his decision. When I go in the woods, I'm prepared for all comers. I could stay for a few days real easy. And he often brought a friend, a young guy that was strong like him. He was immensely strong, and he would go into these places where I don't even go. But I would meet him out there on the trail. He just tolerated me, and I tolerated him. I was coming back from my farm, and I was coming out of the wilderness, and every day I would see these deer. It was really hard times. The road was closed. There was no jobs, and I kept seeing this deer in the same place every day. It was eating the acorns off the tree. I thought, oh, should I do this? I pulled out my little teeny pistol and pop! And the deer fell down, and I was dressing it out, and here comes Dick Price down the trail. He just went right on by. So that was cool. And that was really a nice influx of good food for the family in those hard times. I was really looking to do my art trip someplace. So I got into the barn and we started doing stuff. First I made a huge barnyard with all these animals and chickens and geese and stuff. And then I built a pottery studio and I started making pots and ceramic sculptures. And we started playing music a lot then, and I started making drums. I started making Mediterranean style hand drums. And,
on the potter's wheel, right?
Yeah. And then about the same time I started getting into hunting for jade and making jade jewelry. In those days I used to go fishing every morning. So before I did all the pottery thing, I would go down to the beach below the big house. I had a kayak. I would go out and catch a whole bunch of fish and bring them back. By noon, we could fillet the fish and have a nice lunch, and I would go to work in the pottery shop. And we had a great organic garden right outside the door. It was really a fun time.
You had your pottery studio, and you had a art partner there who shared it with you?
Yeah, several. The first one was Carl Lee, and then it was John Horler. We have great boutiques in the house that he did for us.
It was a lot earlier that you were a massage practitioner, right? Before the garden, before the art barn.
No, all during the garden. I gardened and massaged. But actually in the beginning I was a night man for a long time, and I started the garden. But then I met Molly Day Shackman, and she taught me how to massage. And so I got on the massage crew, and I was making pretty good money as a masseur. And I had my little garden, and I was doing my yogi trip up there in the Z Garage. It was just a little addition to another building. That's where I lived with Gabrielle.
And you had how many dogs again?
I think I had 13 dogs.
Just you and the 13 dogs in the tiny room.
I think it was really a good time. I got interested in the bees. And in the great big eucalyptus tree there was a great big gigantic beehive. And so every year it used to swarm. And it swarmed and came down, and I caught the swarm and put it in a garbage can and took it over to my house. And I bought a beehive, and I dumped them all into this beehive, and I started my first beehive. But everybody hated me because of that, because these were not friendly bees. These are mean, nasty suckers. They stung everybody. And finally I had to get rid of them. All the time different people would come to Esalen. I met Allen Ginsberg. That was really nice.
Yeah, and so you weren't like part of all the encounter groups and psychological stuff that was going on?
I tell you, the person that really influenced me a lot was Claudio Naranjo. Oh, he was a really interesting person. He was a psychotherapist, so he had all kinds of credentials and stuff. But he had traveled all around the world studying psychedelic drugs in primitive cultures. And I used to lead this workshop called the Ladihan, which was really amazing to participate in that. That was really great. And then he introduced me to this drug called ibogaine, and took a whole bunch of ibogaine several times. But then I lost it there for a while. I couldn't talk to anybody for a month.
At this point, you were living on the north side of the property with Mom and...
No, this was before that.
Okay.
I was living in Z Garage on the third level.
And did you disappear into the forest a little bit? Or what did you do during that time when you were unable to socialize or relate to people?
Yeah, no, and I was studying Buddhism at the same time, doing a lot of meditation, and I was working that garden, a little bit in the garden. I could do that. Anyway, I thought it was really interesting because I would occasionally go into the lodge, and even though I couldn't speak to anyone, if I sat at the table, I could listen to everybody's conversation at one time and comprehend it all. It wasn't like it was isolated.
And so that particular trip lasted a whole month.
Changed my life.
A lot of people were tripping at that time at parties. And tell me about the LSD, and if you'd like to share a little bit about what was acid like.
I would take some, and I remember a moment at the Baez concert. Ravi Shankar was there too. That was really a beautiful experience. She has the most beautiful voice, and you could listen, it would echo back out of the canyon.
Beautiful.
They had a lot of amplifiers and stuff like that. And Crosby, Stills and Nash were there. And we had a little pottery booth. We were selling my pottery. And John Horler was selling his big batiks. Were flying everywhere. It was pretty neat. Then later on, we started a belly dancing troupe. And every Friday afternoon in Huxley, we would have somebody come who was an accomplished belly dancer and give us lessons, and we would play drums, and that became the foundation of a group that we started called the Natives.
Big Sur Natives, yes. And so was Gabrielle, were you with her at this point and she was dancing? Gabrielle Roth was your partner for a while. And then the love of your life was the next stop, which was my mom, Peggy, and she was a real belly dancer as well. We had a lot of fun, and I always remember her, and she was pregnant, and it was like she had a little basketball on the front of her, and she did the birth dance. Shiftatelli, yeah, that was really super nice, and we got lots of photos. We still have good photos of it. What was it like to be a father and raise your children there? You have Jonathan Horan, who is there part-time, and Lucia Horan, and myself, Jasmine Horan. What was it like raising kids around Esalen?
Oh, it was great. What was really great was they had a gazebo. And the kids were all at the gazebo most of the time. And I was working as a potter in the barn. And so we were really close. And then I used to get up and go fishing every morning. And then come back and clean the fish and have lunch and then go to work in my pottery shop. That was really ideal.
One of my first memories is actually sitting on your lap in the art barn at the potter's wheel, throwing a pot with you or something. And I remember sitting on your lap and my legs used to dangle down, or you would put me with some clay over there and hang out while you were in your shop. So there was a barn there that you guys turned into the studio.
Yeah.
And then at what point did you find that? Can you tell the story about finding the jade in the kitchen and what that did for you as an artist?
Oh yeah, it totally changed everything. I really thought that there was something in this jewelry trip, and I wanted to do turn jade into usable jewelry. First job I got at Esalen was a night cleanup man. And after everybody had dinner and went after about 10 o'clock, and then I would take and put all the chairs on the tables and sweep the floor and mop the floor. In those days, Esalen was a meeting place for all the locals also. Everybody would be fossicking and showing their pieces they had found that day and everything. But then this was late at night, and I was sweeping up the floor, and I got all this stuff up, and here was this beautiful little beach pebble. It wasn't big, but it was clear.
Shiny.
And it was a real ocean piece. God had made it right out of the ocean. And I kept looking at it, and I go, this is really a beautiful stone. But at this point, no one was doing anything with it except trading it. And I thought, this has real potential because you can make it into something really good. So in those days, everybody would go to the beach and look for jade on your day off and have a picnic and go fishing and look for jade. But this particular time, Neil Rose and we walked all the way from Cape San Martin all the way to Gorda. And at one point you had to climb over this big bluff. And it's just really hairy. And then you got to time your travels because of the tide gets so high you can't get washed away real easy in the last stretch of it. But we did that. We got through. We didn't find much. We found a few odds and ends, and it wasn't anything spectacular. And Neil was real tired, and he wanted to get off the beach and go home. And so he was walking up the mountain. And I was just coming down the beach, and I watched the wave go out, and there was like a great big green peyote button sticking out of the sand. And I went down there like a hound dog and dug in. It was about the size of a volleyball. And it weighed a whole bunch. It must have weighed 80 pounds. I packed that thing out, and then that was the beginning because I was really curious about what am I going to do with this thing now. I really wanted to get into my art trip. I kind of backed off of the massage and all that, and I went over to the barn. We did all kinds of good stuff. We had a bronze foundry. We built a photo lab, horse mayor. There were lots of other good artists that came through. Bob Danzer was one of them, and he really helped me out. Changed my whole way of thinking, and Tony Wagner. But it was that boulder. At first I bought some tumblers, and I tried to break it up with a hammer, and that was really stupid. But it didn't really work. At night my teeth would hurt from smacking on the thing. And I get all these broken pieces and put them in the tumbler and tumble them. I made all kinds of really cool things out of it. But at some point while I was doing that, my old friend Fleet came by, and he was watching me bang on this thing, and he says, "Richard, you need a diamond saw real bad, because this thing is way harder than you're ever going to get through." I had barely put a dent in it. I took his advice. I got an old diamond saw, and
so that kind of transitioned you as an artist.
And the red jasper.
And in terms of the smaller piece that you found, like that kind of was the impetus for making jewelry, but you also transitioned between being a potter and jeweler by making those clay beads and hanging them with jade, right? So that kind of transitioned you as an artist.
From point 16, so it was a really nice setup. We had the handmade beads, we had beautiful pieces of jade, and then as an accent it had these red jasper pieces in between. It was really cool.
What are you proud of when you look back at your life and time in Esalen and Big Sur?
I love it that I was able to do all that great artwork. I did all kinds of stuff, and I wish I had been able to go further with it. But a lot of it is, when you're doing things like casting metal sculptures and stuff, it's a marketing thing, and that whole end of it I wasn't very good at. I was good at making things, but I wasn't so good at selling things. I thank the Murphy family for putting up with me But I tell you, I put a lot of good work into that place.
Thank you for listening to Voices of Esalen. Today's show is produced in conjunction with Cher Levine. Our theme song is by Nico Holloman. Until next time, be well.